Throughout history, humans have created food preservation methods that include fermenting, canning, and much more. Humans have been finding ways to preserve foods in order to prevent spoilage and illnesses borne by the bacteria produced during decomposition. Food decomposition is caused by the overgrowth of microbes including yeast, mold, and bacteria. Humans have harnessed some of these microbes to preserve and store foods through a process called fermentation. Fermentation is a technique for preservation dating back to as far as 6000 BC. Fermentation preserves food by creating a favorable environment for good bacterial growth that changes the chemical composition of foods, thus adding flavor and helping preserve the food as edible by preventing the growth of bad microorganisms. Fermentation is still used today in bread making, chocolate manufacturing, dairy, beers, wines, and salami. Another method for food preservation is canning. The process of canning foods came to be thanks to the French army. In 1795, the French military called for a new way to preserve food that minimized spoilage and facilitated the process of preservation as well as reduced food poisoning. In order to motivate the populace, the army offered 12,000 francs to whoever created a new technique for preservation. In 1809, the inventor Nicolas Appert, a French confectioner and brewer, developed a way to preserve foods. His idea was developed in his own kitchen when he started to notice that airtight glass jars that were boiled were safe from spoilage unless the seal was broken or the glass was cracked. His research began in 1803, during which he worked with vegetables, fruits, dairy meats, and fish. The process of canning was developed when Appert placed foods in glass jars and sealed them tight with wax. He then boiled the jars, killing off any bad microorganisms that remained inside the container. After the creation of canned foods, the evolution of the invention began. Based on Appert's method of food preservation, the tin can process was allegedly developed by Frenchman Philippe de Girard, who came to London and used British merchant Peter Durand as an agent to patent his own idea in 1810. Peter Durand, in the same year, changed the canning containers from glass to cylindrical tin canisters, or tin can for short. With the emergence of the can opener 30 years later, and the cans receiving double seams to improve the airtight seal, mechanization of canning foods began and revolutionized food preservation. Through this technique, food is able to withstand years without showing signs of microbial growth. This method has had minimal changes since the day of its emergence. The only thing done differently is that the metal used for cans were previously the tin cans sealed by soldering with a tin-lead alloy, which could lead to lead poisoning. Now cans are aluminum, and canning is still viewed as the safest form of food preservation.
Drying and smoking are one of the oldest methods of food preservation. Dating back to 12,000 BC, both rely on the manipulation of heat. Drying was traced back to the Middle Eastern and Oriental cultures, where the sun was more available. Fruits and vegetables are naturally dried by the sun and wind. Still houses, which were basically rooms where foods and liquids were distilled, were built in places where there wasn't enough sunlight. The way these still houses work were basically a fire would be lit and the heat and smoke of the flames would dry out the fruits, vegetables, and herbs to keep them preserved. Along with keeping foods preserved, the flames would give the food flavor depending on the wood they used or other flavoring materials and spices used in the burning process. These methods are usually used for cheeses, fish, and meats. Freezing had been used by tribes living in cold climates to slow down their foods from decaying, as well as slowing the spread of bacteria. Freezing was most often used for fish and meats. Through the use of freezing, we have been able to transport food far distances without it spoiling. Freezing is one of the oldest, but still one of the most reliable methods of preservation today. Salting, which is also known as curing, draws moisture from meat, fish, and vegetables through the use of either salt or sugar. Dehydration was the first kind of curing, in which it prevents the growth of bacteria, yeast, and mold by the removal of water. The use of curing was a primary method of food preservation all the way into the late 19th century. Before refrigeration, meat would go bad very quickly. We couldn't send meats overseas or long distances unless we had salt. Salt determined power at one point. Curing was not just a means of preservation, it was also a way to give food more taste and texture. The preservation of food, mainly curing, was highly cherished in ancient times, so much so that the salt was considered a form of currency for a time. Because of its many uses, salt could be traded pound for pound with gold. Through the use of food preservation, we have taken great steps in society as a whole. We have taken the ability to accomplish great tasks, such as the transportation of food great distances in length and for long periods of time, while still keeping it from rotting or spoiling. This allowed us to colonize into places where food was scarce, and places where hunting wasn't an option because animals were hard to come by, and the land wasn't suitable for agriculture. By transporting food, we still maintain its original state. We have been able to successfully trade with other countries across the world, introducing new foods to societies that have never been able to hunt or grow a certain meal due to their location, and vice versa.
Since the introduction of canning in the late 18th century, it has revolutionized the way we store food here in America. Being able to store food for very long periods of time at a reasonable cost was the driving force for the popularity of canning. Although not much has changed in the process, new techniques have been implemented into canning foods. Such techniques include canning foods at peak harvest to ensure maximum nutritional value as well as flavor. Due to the fact that canning in most cases reduces nutritional value and changes flavor, it has been found that for some foods canning can actually improve nutritional value. But is the trade-off of nutrition and flavor worth canning? Yes, because a key aspect of canning is the safety it incorporates into preserving food. This is because bacteria is eliminated during the process by heating the contents of the can, resulting in a sterile product. Essentially, there are two types of canning. For preserves and jams, as well as some fruits, the water bath method is typically used where a sealed jar is placed in boiling water. But the pressure canning method is the safest for most vegetables and meats. The contents of the can are heated to higher temperatures between 116 to 121 degrees Celsius. Yet this method requires a heavy-duty piece of equipment, with a vent, pressure gauges, and a screw clamps. When referring to canning, it doesn't necessarily mean a metal can will be used. Glass jars are also commonly used for canning. Fermentation is another process that usually is found in some type of can. Now that it differs from conventional canning because the fermentation process utilizes yeast to create alcohol. The produced alcohol in turn eliminates bacteria, allowing it to be stored in a container to preserve food for a very long time as well. Wine, which is essentially fermented grape juice, can last for decades without spoiling. Drying or dehydrating your foods is another ancient method of preserving food that is still prevalently used today, although technology has changed the process a bit. When drying foods, the nutrition and enzymes as well as some bacteria aren't destroyed, but suspended. Drying foods can be performed by freezing or heating. What this entails is better tasting food that hasn't lost any nutritious value due to high temperatures. Another advantage of dehydrating foods is that they may be stored in glass, metal, or plastic containers that don't have to be sealed, just kept away from the moisture. Another aspect of drying foods is that they can be rehydrated through different processes that will restore the preserved food back to its original state. But in the US, many dry foods are consumed as is, most commonly fruits, as they develop a new flavor and keep nutritional value. In past time, foods were dehydrated by the use of the sun. Now foods are dried with machines which reduce the possibility of contamination from being outside. One of the most commonly consumed dried foods in the US are dried potatoes, which were developed by the Eastern Regional Research Center, a U.S. Department of Agriculture facility, which led to the development of high-quality dehydrated vegetable products due to the resultant research in explosion puffing process. The explosion puffing process is essentially creating a dry porous vegetable or fruit product that rehydrates more rapidly than heat-dried or freeze-dried foods and has better retention of quality.
Preservatives in foods are designed to prevent bacteria growth and spoilage. Today, the top two methods of preservation are refrigeration and the use of chemicals. In modern households, a refrigerator is used as the prime method of preservation. This process of preservation slows down bacterial growth, which prevents food from spoiling as fast. Refrigeration is, unlike chemical, one of the safest and oldest ways of preservation. Chemicals are used in more than half of all foods today. Food producers have an option of about 14,000 laboratory-made chemicals to choose from that will make their food last longer. The top three most common chemicals used are methycyclopropene, artificial flavors and colors, and aspartame. Methylcyclopropane is one of the most common used chemicals on fruits, which stops them from producing ethylene and can make apples, for instance, last up to a year. Artificial flavors and colors are used in almost all foods today. These chemicals cause the food you're eating to have the flavor and color it offers, such as in juices and yogurts. Aspartame is a sugar substitute that is used by dieters who prefer it to the unpleasant aftertaste of other sugar substitutes. All of these chemicals are produced and sold almost every day, and its health risks are rarely questioned. These chemicals are causing problems in growth development and are adding on to the obesity problem in the United States. Artificial colors, for instance, have been found to be cancer-causing and have been banned in the past by the FDA. In addition, chemically produced preservatives have been proven to cause breathing difficulties and behavioral changes and heart damage. On the other hand, these chemicals have allowed us to become more globalized with other countries and have had the chance to import and export without fear that food might rot out.
High-pressure processing is a cold pasteurization technique by which products are introduced into a vessel and subjected to a high-level isostatic pressure transmitted by water. High-pressure processing respects the sensorial and nutritional properties of food and maintains its original freshness throughout the shelf life. Most processed foods today are heat-treated to kill bacteria, which often diminishes product quality. High-pressure processing provides an alternative means of killing bacteria that can cause spoilage or foodborne disease without a loss of sensory quality or nutrients.
Another thing we will see in the future for sure is lab-grown meat, also known as in vitro meat. So how will we feed the world while food demand is going up and supply is going down? The process of developing in vitro meat involves taking muscle cells and applying a protein that promotes tissue growth. Once this process has begun, it would be theoretically possible to continue producing meat indefinitely without introducing new cells from a living organism. It has been claimed that, conditions being ideal, 2 months of in vitro meat production could deliver up to 50,000 tons of meat from 10 pork muscle cells. In vitro meat may be produced as strips of muscle fiber, which grow through the fusion of precursor cells, either embryonic stem cells or specialized satellite cells found in muscle tissue.
LEDs were once hailed as an evolution to modern lighting. A new technology on the horizon in the field of food preservation is the use of blue LEDs. A team of scientists from the University of Singapore have found that blue-emitting diodes have a strong antibacterial effect on pathogens when used in certain instances. Bacterial cells contain photosensitive compounds that react to light in the visible region of the spectrum. Exposure to these lights begins a process inside those cells that eventually causes them to die. When the pH is mildly acidic and the temperature is kept between 4 and 15 degrees Celsius, the blue LED method is most effective. Acidic foods like fresh fruits and ready-to-eat meat can be preserved under blue LEDs in combination with those cold temperatures without requiring further chemical treatments.